think grandparents don't realize that it is a brand new thing. I mean, we
Yeah.
assume we were
Yeah.
parents, we can do this, but it's different. When you're a grandparent, you have to really step back because you've got to let them be adults and let the parents be 100% in charge of that child.
What my community struggles with is a lot of the unsolicited advice from the grandparent, right? Or the judgment from the grandparent, or the big comment I hear, well, that's not what we did for you.
I think every new grandparent, everybody when they're going to be a grandparent should go to parents and say, hey, here's what I would love to do as a grandparent. I've
Nice.
always wanted to be able to do these things. How does that fit in with your view of what you want as a grandparent for your child?
I love it.
Start the conversation from there and then go on to how can I support you as a parent? Because what I say to grandparents all the time is supporting parents is your number one job as a grandparent. Have those conversations up front. Just establishing that pattern of communication, just establishing the fact that you want to talk about things is going to do so much for your relationship for the rest of your life.
Hello and welcome back to the PedsDocTalk Podcast. I'm excited for you to be here. If you're watching this, it's on our YouTube channel, which is so great to be able to have these amazing conversations with my guest in a visual form for you all. So make sure you subscribe to this channel for more amazing conversations I'll have. I'm excited about today's guest, who is Dee Dee Moore. She's a grandmother herself, helping bridge the gap for grandparents with online resources and a social media following on social media and Instagram as at More Than Grand. And she's joining me today to talk about navigating the generational differences and managing expectations and boundaries as parent with our grandkids. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dr. Mona. I'm excited to be here and talk about grandparenting and parenting.
I'm excited because, on social media, there's so many people educating, but there's not a lot of people doing what you're doing, which is helping bridge that gap. The grandparents are here. This is the first time they are grandparents for many of them. And you posted recently, when a child is born, a grandparent is also born, right? And it's a completely different experience than being a parent. And I think a lot of grandparents don't realize it. So tell me more about yourself and your inspiration for creating More Than Grand.
So I am a mom of 4, grandmother of 3. When my first grandson was born, I still had one. My daughter had literally graduated from high school the day before. So I shifted gears from parent to grandparent overnight. But when I became a grandparent, I realized I couldn't find resources on how to really support parents.
Yeah.
All of the grandparent websites that I found were really focused on activities with the grandkids or else just kind of lifestyle blogs for people that were grandparent age, right? But I couldn't find something that really focused on how to form the good relationship with parents so that you can be supportive and have a good relationship with your grandkids. So I spent a lot of years as a military wife. My husband was active duty Marine Corps for a lot of years. And I learned there that if you need something that you can't find, you figure out a way to make it.
Love it.
So I started a website. I had been working as a communications consultant, and I realized that was the key. That was what was missing was communication tools to help parents and grandparents bridge that gap.
And I love that. And in your community, whether the blog or social media, are most of them grandparents or parents wanting to get resources for their parents?
It's about 50-50 on social
Nice.
media.
Mhm.
So, yeah, which is wonderful. And I love that there are so many parents who are wanting to help their parents navigate grandparenthood. I think grandparents don't realize that it is a brand new thing. I mean, we
Yeah.
assume we were
Yeah.
parents, we can do this. But it's different.
And that's, I guess, my first question, right? What do you think fellow grandparents struggle the most when it comes to taking on this new role and all the guidance? And how is it different, maybe from your own personal experience or from the community and what they're telling you?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have trouble with as a society, as parents, is knowing when to let go, right?
Mm,
Knowing when to say, I need to step back and let my child navigate this, whether it's, letting your 5-year-old take the bus to school
yeah.
or letting your son and daughter-in-law muddle through those early days of parenthood without you guiding them, right?
Yeah.
So I think that stepping back is a really hard thing for anyone as a parent. When you're a grandparent, you have to really step back because you've got to let them be adults and let the parents be 100% in charge of that child.
And that can be so hard for a lot of grandparents. I mean, I love that you were coming on because, we are so blessed to have two sets of grandparents still alive, my husband's family, my husband's parents, and my own parents. And we've also struggled with that, them letting go. And we have four people, right? My mom, my dad, his mom, his dad, and two of them really struggle with the letting go. Two of them have really understood what it means to just let us be. But it can be really hard, trying to, from our end, allowing them into our home, allowing them to have this experience, but also, let making them feel like that we're being listened to, right? That we can be the parent, that we can do what we want and know that if we need their help, that we will ask them for it. A lot of what my community struggles with is a lot of the unsolicited advice from the grandparent, right? Or the judgment from the grandparent, or the big comment I hear, well, that's not what we did for you. And so
Right.
what, going on that topic, like that, well, that's not what we did for you. How do you think that's changed and evolved? I know safety is one of them, but how has this approach just looked different now compared to when, you were raising children?
Absolutely. There is such a big difference. And so much of it is just the volume of information that's
Yeah.
available to parents now. When I was a parent, I had a couple of books. I had my pediatrician.
Mhm.
I had my mom. Like, those were my resources.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what we did as parents was done on the advice of our parents or on our gut, right?
Yeah.
Maybe our gut told us, yes, that's good, or I don't want to do it the way they did. But we trusted our instincts. And I think parents today have a lot more trouble trusting their instincts because there is so much more information out there.
Co-signed, Dee Dee, co-signed. I was just gonna ask you, like, I was gonna ask you, like, how do you think parenting is different now from what you're observing versus,
Yeah.
what was going on? And if you wanna dive into that a little bit deeper into why you feel that way.
Well, I think, just look at social media. Let's just start
Right.
there, right? There are 100 different ways that this is the right way to do
Yes.
parenting.
Yes.
The bottom line is I have the perspective now to know, and I had I don't want to say wisdom, but the trust in my own self to know that there were lots of ways to do parenting. There were lots
Yeah.
of ways to raise a child that would be healthy and a contributing adult when they got to that point. I think parents today really feel this pressure that I have to do things the right way with this child, whether it's feeding, sleeping, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There is one way to do it and it's right. And it's because this person on the internet said that it's right. And I think that that's one thing that I love about your account so much is that it's very evidence based, right?
Mhm.
So many of these parents are following accounts that are just somebody really attractive who has wonderful children and is a great camera. And, that's not necessarily the best place to be getting your advice on how to be a parent.
And it's so much more to me, it's about evidence, but it's also about the nuance of the situation,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
it's the fact that one of the biggest things I try to employ on my following is part of being a good parent is struggling and figuring out how to pivot. So,
Yeah.
like, I give the example that the other day, basically the weekend, my son had this major meltdown that he's never had before, and none of our strategies, and I'm talking someone who talks about tantrums, parenting, none
Right.
of them were working. And what did me and my husband do? Did we get online and start looking at videos or things? No, we turned to each other and we said, what do you want to do? What should we do right now? How do you want to approach this? And we both said, like, we don't know. Like, let's figure it out. Let's give him some space. Maybe let's take him here or do this. And to us, that was part of parenting. And I think that's what I feel has been lost in our generation. And what my mom and dad, I think, did better at is you didn't have all the over information. You didn't have people telling you, well, if you walk away from your child, you're abandoning them and they're going to have trauma. No, you had you working with the situation you were in, right? Like,
Right.
hey, here we are where my child is melting down. And what makes sense for my value system and what makes sense versus, well, this account told me that if I did this, it's going to be wrong. And that to me is such a beautiful part of parenting, is learning the pivoting, which, like you said, when there is over information, you lose those instincts. You lose the ability to say, well, this has been done for generations. And
Right.
like you said, right? And it's tapping back into that and saying, yeah, well, so many people have managed this. I'm not alone. And maybe I got to just figure it out. Maybe
Right.
it's not going to be clear cut.
Absolutely.
Maybe
And
there's no
I
one
do hope
blog that's going to tell me
that
what to
parents are
do,
going
but
to
I can take information from many different things to figure it out.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think that, I hope that there will be a swing,
Yeah.
that parents will realize that it's worth trusting themselves, worth figuring things out. And grandparents, I think perhaps that's part of the problem for grandparents right now too, is
Hmm.
because they see that parents aren't trying to figure things out aren't trusting their instincts.
Right.
And so they want to step in and help them by offering really what is often valuable advice. Um, and so it's hard as a grandparent to know that your advice is not valued whatsoever, because these strangers on the internet are
Yeah.
the ones that your kids are listening to.
And so when it comes to that, obviously this generational difference that when you were, past generations had very limited resources, which I don't think is a bad thing. I really don't.
No.
I actually think people think that it's bad, but it's actually really good. And then now you're competing with this over information and also misinformation and fear, which I don't. The biggest thing for me is the fear mongering. It's the you are damaging your child. When is it really going to be damaged? How do
Right.
you recommend families addressing them? Maybe from the parents' lens and from the grandparents' lens.
Oh, big question.
Yeah.
So, from the parents, I think the first thing they need to, well, actually, for either side, you have to come together for a conversation, knowing what you want out of it, right?
Mhm.
Like, so if you want to come and talk about a specific thing, before you even come to that conversation, think, okay, what are some of the results that might happen from this conversation? What do I want the
Yeah.
result to be? And how can I find out what the other person wants from this conversation, right? So
Mhm.
always leading with letting the other person talk, approaching the subject and saying, "Hey, I'd really like to talk to you about the way you are letting, Junior stay up late when he's at your house.
Yeah.
Can you tell me why it's hard for you to get him to bed on time?" Well, that opens it up for the grandparent in that case, to share their side of the story before they've even been told, "You can't do this anymore," right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because then it doesn't, it just closes off and creates, I think, a little more animosity and a little less ability to be on the same page when I think we could reach a little bit closer of a compromise. Like
Absolutely.
maybe it's not like you're going to do the exact same routine that I do, T to T to T. Like, okay, this is going to happen, but maybe you can try to reach that and maybe put to bed a little bit half an hour later, have a little fun, but come to that common ground, which I think parents often struggle with. And I guess in your experience, do you feel that parents are struggling to set that boundary or communicating those boundaries, or that grandparents are not amenable to those boundaries, or a combination of the two?
I think it's probably a combination of the
Yeah.
two. I do think that one thing that parents are doing that makes it really hard for grandparents is they're
Mhm.
just coming in with this really strict list of
Mm.
rules,
Mhm.
right? It's like, this is how it has to be done. And if you don't do that, and, they're threatening them with not being able to see their grandchildren over
Yeah.
things like, dessert.
Right.
And and I think that the hard stance that parents are taking makes it very hard as a grandparent to feel like you have any
I know.
agency at all in the relationship. Um, yeah, so I think a lot of parents are approaching things just much too harshly. On the other
Ye
hand, grandparents are also, you know, wanting to. We're getting these messages from the internet, from everywhere, from society, about spoiling your grandchildren, right?
Mhm,
That is
mhm.
the overriding thing when somebody says, "Oh, I'm going to be a grandmother. I can't wait to spoil that baby." Well, they've the message has evolved to mean that we don't have to follow the rules, right?
Mhm,
And there are
mhm,
all sorts of
mhm.
messages. That's what we're getting from social media and from society. And so it makes it really, really hard as a grandparent because we're getting messages that are very damaging, right?
Yeah.
That is not the way to approach being a grandparent. It is not, grandma's house, grandma's rules is not a great way to live your life as a grandparent. And so it's a really, really hard place to be in.
I love that you brought both perspectives because, yes, I think the itemized list of this needs to happen doesn't allow for any freedom of autonomy to be that fun grandparent, if you will. And then on the flip side, what you just mentioned about the spoiling the baby, when we come into that mentality that I'm just going to do what I want, it's fun time with grandma, it doesn't allow the parent to feel like they have a place of that some of my rules are going to be followed. Right.
Right.
You're literally already putting both everyone on like this opposite spectrum when the balance. And I think, we've struggled with this too. And I think one of the biggest things my husband and I had to discuss was what are our non negotiables, like truly with our grandparents, not our non negotiables in our home, because those are going to look different, right? So for me and my husband, the biggest things for me as a pediatrician was safety, right? So
Sure.
car seat safety, safety when, safe sleep, because that's not always done. So safety was really important. From a other perspective, I really want a healthy relationship with food. I really want a healthy relationship with, body image and all of that. But my parent, the in-laws, the parents, they have ingrained belief systems on finishing your plate, all that stuff that I may not agree with. So my husband and I had a discussion of like, okay, how much are they spending time with the grandparents? Because if it's that they're spending time like a week or 2 days, they're not going to undo the foundational skills that me and my husband have created. And then yes, enjoy, have more sweets, have that. But if it's like grandma and grandpa are like the secondary caregiver, and they're always involved, then maybe there needs to be a little bit more balance for the child, right? So that it's not like they're just getting free reign and then they don't know the consistency. Like, well, I'm getting sweets and no routine at all at grandma's, and then I come home and you guys are telling me I got to do this. So I think that also matters too, right? Like, how much are the grandparents involved? What is the value system and all that?
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's so true. And I think that that's another thing that parents struggle with often is like, well, this is the way we want to raise our child.
Mm-hmm.
Great. If the grandparents seeing them, 2 weeks a year, you're right. They're not going to undo everything that
Yes.
you've done the rest of
I
the
I mean,
time.
they may reset them back to their factory settings. I love that expression, right? Someone had posted that, like, they go away to grandma's and then they, reset it back to factory settings, and you'll have to reprogram them when you come back. Listen, that's happened to us.
Oh,
We've
absolutely.
like, literally, my son with sweets and screen time, right? He comes back, and we don't mind screen time and sweets, but it's on overload at the grandparents' house, and we know. And as he gets older, though, when it gets easier to reset him back to the routine in the house. Like when
Yeah.
he was 2.5, it was harder. But now that he's 5 almost, he comes back. It's like 4 days of boot camp trying to like get him back. But what did we get from it? We got him to have loving time with his grandparents. Like,
Yes.
so that's what we kind of look at it as. Is this a negative, like you don't listen to me thing, or is it that there's more benefit than there is negative? And that's, I think, what a lot of our generation may sometimes lose when they try to incorporate grandparents who are quote unquote not listening to every single rule that they come up with.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And that's I think the struggle. And I'm sure you see that.
Oh,
Um,
completely.
and in terms of like strategies like that you found helpful for setting boundaries with family members, the biggest thing I think that I try to strive for, which is not always easy, is still creating boundaries with family members, grandparents, but also maintaining respect and understanding across the generations. So, how do you think both sides can do that?
It's really hard. I mean, I'll be honest, it's really hard. And I think that the more that you come to the conversation with the goal being to work things out, to
Hmm.
have an enduring relationship, and to make it possible for grandparents to be a part of their grandchild's life, then I think that if you have that as a goal, you can work things out. If your goal is just to control the way your child is raised, then it's going to be much harder to get grandparents working with you
Yeah,
if part of your goal isn't to bring them into the relationship.
absolutely. I mean, there has to be an understanding of what the common ground will be.
Yeah.
And I think that's so key in your work, and your people that you in your community. You talked about how it's gotten to the point sometimes that maybe the parent doesn't want to have the grandparent in their life, or they'll say, well, you can't see them anymore. Have you created any phrases or work so that there can be more cohesiveness when it gets to that point of like the threats and the, well, you're not going to be involved, or is it just such a complicated topic there?
Yeah, that is a little bit beyond my expertise, to be honest
Yeah.
with you, which is
Yeah.
why I really, really am trying to reach expectant grandparents and brand new grandparents so that the conversations can start before they get to that point.
Yeah.
The resources that I've created are really geared towards brand new grandparents so that those patterns can start out positive from the beginning.
And so starting from that beginning, obviously I don't want to give too much all the information, but like what would you say to a new grandparent listening, or maybe a parent who's listening? And we can start with the grandparent. What would you say would be the best step to create a healthy relationship with the parent, and then they're obviously their grandkid as well, and that dynamic?
I think every new grandparent, everybody when they're going to be a grandparent should go to parents and say, "Hey, here's what I would love to do as a grandparent. I've
Nice.
always wanted to be able to do these things. How does that fit in with your view of what you want as a grandparent for your child?"
I love it.
Start the conversation from there and then go on to how can I support you as a parent? Because what I say to grandparents all the time is supporting parents is your number one job as a
Yeah.
grandparent. And once you have established how you can support parents and help them out and be there for them, everything's gonna be easier.
Yeah. And the reason I love what you just said, you just literally put it into the parent's responsibility in a healthy way. What I mean by that is, when I went through a traumatic delivery, every single person is experiencing something different, right? So
Right.
me going through trauma, me being a parent is much different than someone who may have gone through the exact same traumatic experience, because we're all different. So I didn't want certain things, but that other person may want it. So putting the onus on the parent, like saying, "Hey, what is it that you need from me?" And I love that phrase, what every grandparent should approach, like in terms of how do you see me fitting into this, is
Yeah.
such a healthy phrase, because that is where I think the communication is lacking. Because if you don't have that, you go in blind and you're like, well, I don't know what my role is here. And I saw that happen with my mom and my older sister. I saw that there was no communication there, and it really kind of created a volatile relationship, and it was unfortunate, right? Where there wasn't a strong relationship with the grandkids. And I do want that to happen for my mom, that she gets a little bit more of a different experience with my children. And I think I'm going to use that more. You just taught me something beautifully. Like I speak to my mom a lot about showing up and that, but like, mom, what do you want? Like what, because I
Yeah.
think another thing that comes up, Dee Dee, is we often feel that, I think my generation, and especially a lot of my peers, have this expectation of what a grandparent is going to do. Meaning,
Right.
we ourselves will say, well, oh yeah, they're going to take care of the kids and they're going to be following my rules. And that's not always the case. And so then
Yeah.
when the grandparent's not doing that, it's unmet expectation. And then there's resentment and a grudge. But if you lay it out there, like my mom and dad are not fun grandparents. I love them, but they're not the type to just take initiative and take the kids out. You need to kind of tell them what to do. Whereas my in-laws will just say, "Hey, let's go to the park." And so knowing that, it makes us less frustrated when my parents come to visit, where I don't expect them to take. I create an itinerary and I say, "Hey, if you want to take Ryan to the museum and then after take him to the park." And it makes everyone happier because there's guidance, there's less
Right.
resentment, there's less unmet communication, because we actually know each other's style. And I love what you said that. And then in terms of a parent, what do you wish every parent would ask their grandparent, or the parent, the grandparent of the child, or how would they would approach them?
I would say that parents should go again before that baby's born, ideally, and
Yeah.
say, "Hey, have you thought about how you'd like to be involved?
Yeah.
Here are some ways that would be really helpful to me." Have those conversations up front. Just establishing that pattern of communication, just establishing the fact that you want to talk about things is going to do so much for your
Yeah.
relationship for the rest of your life, quite honestly. And that was, one of the things that I have a guide called New Grandparent Essentials, and one of the grandmothers who tested it out for me before I started selling it said, I have never had deep conversations with my daughter. She has
Mm,
always held things close to her chest.
mm,
And, we've never had the kind of relationship where we talk about deep subjects or share innermost feelings. She said, this changed everything. When I went to her and asked her these questions about that you suggested I ask, we now have an incredibly close
I
relationship
love
that we
it.
never had before. And so, yes, just establishing the fact that you want to talk to each other and listen to each other is going to go so far.
I mean, I think people forget this, but communication is the foundation of every single thing we do as human beings. Like you're saying it
Exactly.
right. I mean, even as a parenting account, right? Like in a parenting like coach and this podcast, like the communication we have with our children, our partners, and then
Yes,
this and a lot of I think the issues in relationships come down to lack of communication as we know, right? Like
absolutely.
this lack of just explaining where we stand and calmly communicating and not letting resentment get in because one thing that I think I often talk about is maybe you grew up with a certain parent, right? And then maybe there was childhood trauma. I'm going to throw that in there. Maybe there was something your parent did that didn't sit well and then now you see them in this grandparent role and you're feeling protective for your child. You're feeling
Right.
like, well, like I use the example of like my husband's mom used to shame him on how he looked, like being too
Mm.
thin, and now we see that kind of happening with my son. So we are very protective because we know how that felt. We know that we don't want that. And so to us, that is a non negotiable that we want to raise a child who loves their body. But then again, it goes down to coming up with that shorter list of non negotiables that I think a lot of parents forget that needs to happen when you kind of compromise on the things that are able to be compromised. And that doesn't mean that you have to compromise your parenting strategies or anything, but not coming in hot is what I'm trying to say,
Yeah,
like
absolutely. And I think I want parents to know that you are the one that has the influence over your children.
Yes.
What you do matters way more than what anybody else does. And so if, grandparents are coming in and, sitting at dinner and complaining about, oh, I can't eat that or I'll get fat. That's a teaching moment for you with
Mhm,
your
correct.
daughter. That's not a you don't have to change the way grandmother talks. Probably that's not gonna happen. Certainly, you can ask her not to say things like that, but, don't get worried about how that's gonna affect your daughter. If nothing else, it's gonna show her another side of things.
I like to use the example, like, my son is really into quote unquote girly things, meaning he likes unicorns, he likes princesses, he wants to wear pink, he asked me if I can paint his nails, and this is because he sees a mom who's constantly doing that, and he likes it. Like, it's not anything more than just a little boy who loves those things, and my mother-in-law, used to say, "Well, that's not for you, that's for girls," and the teaching point in front of my son was not, "Mom, can you not say that?" It was, "Ryan, you like the princess cup? Yeah, sure, I can get you the princess cup. I think that's a good idea." Versus putting my grandmother down in front of him, right?
Right,
Even though
right.
I know I don't like that. And that's how he builds up, right? His mom, who's the safest space in the world, is telling him, yeah, sweetie, it's okay. I agree with
Yeah,
you. If you want it, it can be for you. Or after the fact, maybe not in front of grandma. Hey,
right.
sweetie, I want you to know that your body is beautiful and I love your body. And I think you know that you're very strong. And so, yes, and I know we're not therapists, so this goes beyond like,
Sure.
I did ask you that question earlier about when it gets to that point that you want to cut ties.
Yeah.
Of course, that's beyond your pay grade and what you're
Right,
educated to
right.
do. But of course, you might need to see a therapist, a family therapist, to see what makes sense for your family. But these are all strategies and tips to hopefully prevent that from happening. And I love that we're talking about this and really get to a point of realizing what it is that's going to be the best for both parties. And
Right.
again, you're not sacrificing yourself. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of the culture I feel is parents feel sacrificed, that they're not listening and but they don't do this and they're horrible, when it's like, do you want that person in your child's life? Is there some redeeming quality there? Which I imagine there is. And I don't want us to block that experience because, from a health aspect, we know that grandparents can provide a very positive experience into children, but also that children can really help grandparents, meaning longevity, their mental health. And I'm not saying that we should force relationships that are unhealthy and traumatizing, but we should try our best to see if a relationship is possible by coming to these compromises and having this healthy communication.
Well, one of the things that I wonder sometimes is I see so many parents, removing themselves from unhealthy relationships.
Mhm.
what kind of coping skills are we teaching our kids,
I
right?
know, I know.
Does everything have to be perfect? Do we
Yeah,
is I know that I learned a lot of lessons from people who were difficult to get along with. I
yeah,
learned a lot
yeah,
of things about how to navigate difficult relationships from people in my own family.
right.
Um, and I think that it's very, very helpful to have those negative examples of what not to do, of how not to be treat people, because that other, it's not realistic to think that our child is going to be around nothing but people who are supportive
Right.
and healthy for their lifetime. So,
I actually really love that perspective, and I think but estrangement, obviously is more prominent now than in generations past,
for
right?
sure.
And I think there was, I mean, my husband were reading about it, and I've talked about this on my podcast. I haven't shared it on my social, but my sister is estranged from our family, so
Okay.
she made the decision not to speak to any of us. This was about 3 years ago now, for reasons that I will never judge because I'm not in her shoes, but. When I look from, like, when my husband looks from the outside, he's like, interesting. Like that does the punishment doesn't fit the crime, if you will, meaning it doesn't seem appropriate for what she feels that the family did. But that being said, estrangement is very complicated. And you brought up a really strong point that I think one of the things that I love about working through unhealthy family dynamics is, again, that troubleshooting, the discussions. And my husband has a very volatile relationship with his family, meaning he's gone through a lot of traumatic experiences, and we've talked about estrangement. And he said exactly what you said. He's like, I'm actually, with my therapy, able to work through it, and I know that my parents are going to die, and I feel like although they really hurt me in some ways, I know that they're going to provide something new to my child because they have changed and they love my kids and they want a different start, and they were different people back in those
Right.
days,
Exactly.
and I really appreciate him for that. And I tell him, I'm like, if you ever feel it's making you not able to be present for your son, then we need to discuss that. But that is such a touchy, I know that's such a hard situation. And I'm not saying that I hope that every parent who decides to estrange from their grandparent rethinks it, but I want us, it's a very difficult decision. And I think there is a stronger movement to say, well, let me just cut ties versus can we really find ways to, like you said, use this in a healthy way? Like, but it's hard. It's really hard.
It's a tough, yeah.
And I know that, this can open up a can of worms. And I think so fondly of my sister. I miss her dearly. I haven't talked to her in years when we used to be so close, but it's it's such a hard situation to feel like, could we have communicated differently or done something differently where that wouldn't have been what needed to happen for her,
Yeah.
and I know that this is a whole other conversation that I can have with the therapist on estrangement, because I think estrangement in
Yeah.
families is a really important conversation, but it kind of goes in line to what we're talking about, because parents will say, well, I don't want you in my kid's life. Like, you just
Yeah.
don't, you don't have any say. And I saw that happen to my mom, and I saw that how much it hurt her for being a very kind human being. And, I told my husband, I'm like, my parents are not perfect. They have a lot of things that I don't love about them. I'm not going to lie to you, but they do have love. Like, I mean, there is love there. They may not communicate with me as I would ideally hope, but there is love. And so that would be my message, I guess, to kind of think about what it is that you are really letting go of and working very closely with your family and therapist to see if that's the right decision for you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I do, I hope that more families can find ways to work things out.
Well, and I think your work is so great because I understand that I, again, asked you therapist like questions at the
Right.
end. That one question, I apologize for that. But no, you're
No worries.
talking about from the beginning, how we can create this foundation. And it doesn't
Right.
mean that the foundation will be this amazing, everyone's happy together and taking family photos and laughing at the dinner table. But it really can mean the difference between animosity and understanding, which I think is so healthy. I really love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
What would be your final uplifting message for everyone listening? I always ask my guests after we talk about deep things like estrangement and, not agreeing on things. What would be that message for everyone tuning in, whether they're a grandparent or a parent tuning in today?
Well, I'll just go back to my guiding principle is that family is always going to be there for you in
Mhm.
ways that other communities may not be. And I do think that it is so worth working on making your family as strong as possible and including all the generations in that
Yeah.
family outlook.
I think that's so beautiful. And I really love what you said about, again, really taking what each party wants and bringing that to the table before the child's born. Remember, if you're listening to this and it hasn't happened yet, you could still do it. Like I said, I plan on talking to my
Yes.
mom and even my mother-in-law, about it, and even my dad, and saying, hey, what is it that you want? What don't you like about being a grandparent? What
Right.
is the things that I'm asking you to do that don't sit right with you? Because I don't want to do that, because then we're all going to be unhappy. And you really taught me that. And again, I just want to thank you for that, because I think it really can set a healthier foundation for generations to really enjoy this experience, of parenting and grandparenting, and provide that child with so much more love.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about, right? I mean, we are
Yes.
all there for that child.
Yeah, and I go back to that love. And whenever we feel like, oh my gosh, they did this or they did this, me and my husband always go back to, but do they love them? Like, is
Right.
there love there? Is there
Yeah.
caring? And again, going back to this, like, did they listen to the few non-negotiables we had? And they did. And did they keep them healthy? Did they keep them safe? And did they
Right.
love them? And if those three things are being met, it's okay. Can we do this? And that is where we come from. And I like that I was able to share that perspective with the listeners, because I don't think I talked about that, that part of my life a lot. But it is true. It's hard. You said they're in families, there's a lot of love and they'll always be there for you. And I recognize that relationships are also very complicated. I'm not ever going to deny that. But I think me and Dee Dee can agree that how can we work to a better solution versus, feeling sadness and regret, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Dee Dee, where can people go to stay connected? More importantly, tell us more about the resources you have, your website again, your social media, and anything else for our listeners today.
So I've made everything simple. Everything's at more than grand. So that's my label on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, wherever you want to find me.
Perfect.
My website is morethangrand.com. I have all sorts of resources for new grandparents, and hope that they'll come take advantage of them. I have a great newsletter that goes out twice a week, and you can sign up for that on my website.
And in your resources, do you allow parents to purchase to gift to their grandparents?
Yes,
Okay.
that has happened several times. So
Okay. Perfect.
that is entirely possible. Everything's digital, so it's just a
Nice.
digital download and easy to do.
Thank you so much, Dee Dee. This was such an amazing conversation. As you evolve in your own grandparent journey, and I evolve in my parenting journey, I would love to have you back on. I'm sure your wisdom will continue to grow as you navigate, your role as a grandparent and as your community grows. And I'm just so glad that we could connect together and share this really unifying, love-filled episode with everyone to get today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'd love to come back and talk anytime.
Thanks for tuning in. If you love this conversation, make sure to hit that thumbs up sign, share this episode on your social media channels, and subscribe to this channel to stay up to date on all future episodes and our weekly educational videos. Have questions or comments? Make sure to comment below, and I'll see you all next time. Stay well, stay loved, and keep on shining.